Well, welcome to the first episode of Forward Progress. I'm your host, Nubis Padhye, and today I have one of my good friends joining me. We coached together back in 2012, so we've known each other for 12 years. Coached for him, was his defensive coordinator back at St. Joseph's College in Indiana. A good friend of mine, Dan Day. How you doing, Coach Day?
I'm awesome, man. Well, honestly, honored to be the first of this series. Like, what a when we're looking back, I'm hopeful to get some royalties on this thing here in about 10 years. So, man, I appreciate
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you a nickel on the dollar. And it's recorded now, so you have actual evidence.
it. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know how big it's gonna get. You might owe me money when it's all said and done, but we'll live with it. So, how's everything going, man? How's off season life treating you?
Really good right now. I mean, it's when we first kind of came back to rebuild the program, we've had so many ups and downs in that process, right? And I think being able to hit the best season we've had in a couple of years, there's so many recruiting tactics that you look at of what helps you be successful, right? And at the end of the
Yeah,
day, I think I don't know how many coaches really just want to admit it, right? But winning helps a whole lot, right?
yeah,
In terms
yeah,
of being able to, just take that next step in the upper, being able to grab a little bit higher level of talent, this next year. And so, being able to build off that momentum we had going down the stretch has really kind of parlayed into a really good offseason. And specifically our recruiting class is the best we feel like we've ever had here.
yeah. I was gonna say you probably were able to go after and target a few guys that maybe in the past not able to get on board as easily.
Yeah. Yeah, just that interest level in general, right? And I still, being, I don't know, I guess a kid and sometimes a video game nerd at heart, I still look at the greatest game ever being NCAA. I heard it's coming, making a comeback here in the
Yeah,
summer. But in recruiting process, like my mind still equates it to the old, like their priorities board, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And winning program is a really, really important, part of that. And I think so just being able to have that success just opens that pool for the level of talent, we were able to get. And I think, honestly, man, I think the biggest trap that coaches fall into in the rebuild process, right, is making sure that your recruiting philosophy still even though you can grab some more of this talent,
mhm,
making sure they still fit the program, and what you've already started to build, and don't kind of get what I kind of call talent blind, right? Of just
yeah,
recruiting football players now, we got to this step in the rebuild because of how awesome our kids are, right? Not
yeah.
just the talent, but how awesome they are, and making sure we're still recruiting the intangibles.
Right. Now I know obviously you're a big culture guy. I assume that's kind of what you're really kind of leaning towards there is that you got to make sure you're recruiting the right guys to that culture, to that mindset, and that vision that you have for the program, regardless of what their talent level is. Right, still making sure they have those key factors behind the talent is
100%, man.
really, really
100%, right?
important.
Yep. Evaluating the character aspect of them, academic aspect, right? I think, we all talk about the importance of it, but I think, for the most part, there are certain times you're at places, right? And you have to recruit and you want to be picky, but you also just kind of have to take what you can get, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But being able to, some benefit of being in a scholarship program, and also when you have that success, I think you're able to be a little bit more selective on the guys you're bringing in terms of a academic profile. Being able to raise that in the recruiting process is important too, right? And I think from the academic standpoint too, I think it's not a one size fits all equation in terms of the recruiting process, right? Like some guys are just really smart and don't have to work hard academically.
right,
Um, that doesn't mean that, right? That you're bringing in the right fit just because they're really smart people,
right,
right? I'd rather have the high GPA guys that work hard in the classroom.
yeah.
And I think those aspects of kind of fitting that academically helps know they're going to mold to your program pretty well.
Yeah, I don't know if it was me and you that used to talk about this, but I know I've talked about it with other guys that I'd rather take a guy that has a lower test score and a higher GPA as opposed to
100%.
the other way around. Because if I see a kid that has a super high SAT or plus 30 ACT.
Yep.
And then I look at his GPA and he's sitting at 2.728. It's like, that's like a red flag. Like, this guy doesn't truly apply himself
Yep.
to reach the level of potential he's capable of reaching. And you get the flip end, you get a kid that he might be an 18, 19, 20 ACT, but if he's sitting there with a 3,
Yep.
5 or above, it's like, this guy is going to maximize his potential. He may not be, and then that translates to the field, right? He may not be the most talented, but if he's going to maximize each day what he's capable of doing, that in the long run is going to be what you build
100%.
the program around.
100%. Couldn't agree with that more. Yep.
So nice. So where are you guys at in your off season right now? You're still in that winter workouts, morning runs, those types of that phase of your program there?
Yeah, we've really honestly just turned that page. So here, with the staff size we have, when we come back in January, we just lift. So that way, like in our profession, News, I know you and I have had this conversation a lot. Like, we all want to pound the table and say we're grinders, right? But at the end of the day, there's 24 hours in the day. And your coaches are also human beings that, probably want to have some semblance of a life. So at this type of a level, when we don't have a lot of extra help, I try to segment our off season to maximize their hours as well. So when we come back in January, the only thing we do program wise at the start is lifting. We will have a couple of what we call our character camp sessions in January, but for the most part, the only physical development we do in January is lifting. So that way our coaches can just focus on recruiting, right? Like, just maximize every second we're putting into, recruiting. So then we hit February, that's when we introduce more, Division II, we can have up to 2 hours of individual instruction, 1 hour field work, 1 hour, film study within the eight groups. But that's when we incorporate that as well. So doing our morning conditionings, our 6 a.m. runs, that being a really, really big part. I think your 6 a.m. runs is your first picture. Weight room too, to an extent, but I think your 6 a.m. runs are your first picture of who you are going to be next year, right? It's your first indication of what are our strengths and more importantly, what are our weaknesses? What do we know we need to attack and change? Because mentality, right? Your team's mindset, and your culture absolutely built in these months. You don't build culture in the fall. Your culture is what it was the day you get to camp. Then it's just football, right? And your culture is almost weathering the storm of the season. So we've got to make sure we're building that to the strongest level possible in these months to be able to, withstand the battering that it takes, right, in season. Because football, your success, and I think this is completely inaccurate, but it's just human nature. I think everybody looks at your success on a football field. Well, they have that's their culture. No, man, like, football success has so many variables that come into play. Like, that's not, you don't win games just because of culture. And I do think there are times you lose games, right, because of culture, but it's something you have to build in the off season as high as you can.
Kind of one of those things where when a lot of the other elements that go into it are equal, the culture piece is going to be what might
Mhm.
get you over the hump or might keep you from climbing over that hump. And that might be that piece that it's a huge piece, but it may only matter in only a few certain situations, a few certain games where, hey, the playing field's pretty level. Because, I don't care where you are, you're going to have some games where the team you're playing really isn't as good as you, it doesn't have as much talent as you or whatever. And then there's some teams that they're really good.
Yep.
And like, there's probably a small percentage of games that are actually, hey, everything's even, but that's where the culture is the most important in making
Yep.
the difference in between those games. And then that's what leads to, winning and losing seasons. When you're sitting there on that threshold and you're going back and forth. I mean, shoot, you guys had it this year. What'd you guys win? 4 of your last 5? Is that what it was that you
Yeah,
guys
down the stretch. 5 of the last 6. Yeah,
5 of the
5 of
last
the
6?
6. Yep.
And I gotta imagine you're looking back on it. Yeah, there's scheme and but I feel like that's probably where a lot of the culture That's where it starts to
100%.
show up, right? Like that's where it
Absolutely,
starts to
no
make that
question.
difference.
Absolutely, right? Because if our culture wasn't strong, you don't withstand that, right?
Right.
Like you don't withstand, we would have tanked. I mean, honestly, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm talking about in terms of building that culture. And it was really cool asking our guys in our exit meetings, we were sitting there at one point, right, at 1 in 5, and asking our players, like, what changed, right? And it was honestly astonishing to me. Out of a roster, when we go through exit meetings, not including the seniors, but 80 guys, right? So we go through the exit meetings, and those guys say one player leadership, but drilling that down even more, multiple. I'm talking into the tens, right? And that's an open-ended question, right? What changed?
Mhm.
13, 14, 15 of our guys said, one of our team captains actually wore, we give out number one here. You can't choose number one, it's given out. And that was to Dio DeSwa, one of our captains. And like literally when
That
you
and number
question,
65, right? 65, you got to earn that one, right?
nah, that's just last guy kind of on the bus. That's what we let him roll in,
I see it
right?
hanging in the background over
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah. But we don't that number's given to you, right?
Yeah.
And so many of our guys said, what changed? Dio's leadership, right? And rewind that, right? Well, and nobody said coaches, which is I have no problem with that. I'm not saying that's bad. Like it was all about player leadership in that moment.
Yeah.
Well, in the summer, we have 87 guys. That's what we had last July. So we had 87 guys that came for a voluntary workout window. So we ran a little bit of a leadership academy with the group, a group of guys that wanted to be a part of that. And a lot of the lessons, we had talked about in that leadership academy, the players said Dio, player leadership. Dio in our exit meeting said, like, the opportunity to learn how to lead in those meetings set me up to be ready to take over in that moment. You know what I mean? So like it's an absolute, so many times it's kind of anecdotal of this is what it gives you. Like that was a direct correlation of the work done in the summer to develop a person, not football player, but a person, and how that helped us in that moment.
So what did you guys do during those leadership sessions? How did you guys train that? Like what was your guys' structure for that?
Yeah. I'd have to honestly look back for that one specifically. It was anytime I'm in the off season, I put together a curriculum, and that's kind of built and developed on what I think, from our team culture that we need at that moment. And so that one, if I can remember correctly off the top of my head, it was really learning before. We had 3 different sessions. One was before I can lead, I must follow. One was, teaching them the importance of, the before, you can lead, right? And everybody looks at a leader as the most important aspect of getting through a bad situation, when really, a lot of times it's the first follower. It's the first guy that has the courage to follow the leader and get everybody else in line. That that doesn't get talked about, but that guy's really, really important. So talking about how to be a good follower, right, in turn then becoming a good leader. Part of that, one of the sessions in the summer really focused on, as a leader, how do you communicate, right? Like how do I call out my teammates? How do I have that conversation? And because, man, like we take for granted, these guys have no idea how to do that. Because I cannot stand when we as coaches, or not just coaches, but us older people at this point, we say, well, kids today don't know how to lead. Like, no, kids today know what we teach them.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't know how to lead, they haven't been put in those situations. They don't, you think about when we were kids, you and I, right? You're going out and playing, pickup games with the neighborhood kids, right? And you learn
Yeah.
in those situations, conflict resolution. You learn leadership if you're the captain that day and you pick your team, whatever, right? Like you're learning those situations. Man, these guys aren't in that. They don't have that same just kind of natural training. So teaching them how to talk to the guys, teaching them how to talk to a freshman compared to a younger guy. And then I would say one of the other really important ones for us was just overall connection. Really cool story. One of our best players on our roster, number 5, Mark Bales. he's not an open, he doesn't really, some guys love leading, right? Other guys kind of need to lead because they're the guy, right? Like Mark's a really good player. So, you don't look at him as a leader because of the natural qualities, but it's natural in sports, right? If you produce, then one way or the other, you're a leader, right? People are going to follow you. So, he really ate up the leadership training. It was really good conversation in that. And then I went into, we went into fall camp, and one of the summer discussions was connection. And so to see this guy who is that alpha male kind of personality, where it's easy to just be by yourself and only hang out with the people, you're already close to. In fall camp, we talked about it in a session, man. And honestly, we never talked about it again. We talked about go out of your way. If you're a senior, you can't expect a freshman to come up to you, but you intimidate those guys, like they're not going to be comfortable with that. And so we talked about that meeting, and in fall camp, seeing Mark would go during camp, not prompted by us in individual, talks, but he'd go sit down with a group of freshmen. Like, that's awesome. Like those are things that again, you don't talk about that in the summer. These guys don't know. I think about myself, right? Like I feel like I'm a really good leader at this point, right? But I can think back to so many times that my coach brought me in and maybe ripped my butt for some things, right? And that helped me learn, well, I probably shouldn't do that. Or brought me in and said, hey, man, like, this is how you can approach this. And so we look at it like us coaches, we're awesome leaders. If somebody taught us, we've got to teach them.
Right. Yeah. And I think the thing you brought up there is, like I know when I was a kid, I'd get home from school, I'd grab whatever sport we were going to go play. I'd grab my hockey equipment and go down to the park and go play hockey with my boys or whatever it was. And like you said, you had to set the rules and set the teams, and somebody had to step up and do that. And a majority of kids today, guys that are in college, guys that are in high school, pretty much every one of them has grown up in the youth sports leagues, where a coach was telling them what to do. Very few kids are growing up nowadays where they're just going out, playing in the streets till the street lights come on, and then they got to come home, etc. Like, that doesn't happen that much anymore. I mean, it's just one of those things. And because of that, I think you don't have as many kids that just naturally are inherently good leaders because they never had to develop that skill. So it's even more on coaches to develop programs and things like this to show them how to lead correctly. And then you get to that point where it's tough for them too now, because A, they haven't built that skill up as they grew up, and then B, now these are their buddies, these are the guys they hang out with in the dorms, these are the guys they party with, whatever. There's a fear with some of them that they don't want to lose friends or whatever it might be, right? And they've got to understand, you got to build that connection so that they understand that they can rip their teammates' butt, they can get on them, but they're still boys once they get in the locker room and they get on. And that's a hard line for guys to cross. That's an area where I think you see a lot of guys struggle to take that first step. And I like the first follower that's a big piece to that. If one guy starts leading, that first follower can make the whole difference, especially, if it's another
powerful guy
or something like that.
Yep.
So going back, I'm going to rewind a little. We were talking about, how the culture, and you talked about this is where you can really see it when you get into that off-season workout. I know culture is an over-encompassing thing, right? It's all parts of your program. It's not just one thing here or one thing there. I mean, realistically, it's going to be everything across the board. But where would you say, like, I know it's hard to say or hard to maybe pinpoint one, but like, where's the starting point for you? Like, when you first got there, how did you go about instilling the culture that you had, the vision that you had? Where do you start with that?
Yeah, that's great point. I mean, we are so unbelievably intentional about our program pillars being talked about. And I say talked about because, dude, you've been a lot of places, right? And have been at the highest levels of football. How many of those places you walk in the facility and the words are plastered all over the walls, right? Like that. And right, wrong, or indifferent, like, me, I'm about as low maintenance of a human being as you're ever going to find. Like, it's just not how my mind works, right? So right, wrong, or indifferent, you come into our program, you'll see our logo all over the place. You don't see our program pillars. They're not on the walls in the office. They're not on the walls in the weight room. They're not on the walls in our locker room. It's not what we do here, because to me, your culture is not what you say it is. Your culture is what your people do, right? So if I throw all these words up on the walls and you come in and I'm our number one pillar is character.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing I talk about, right? And then you come in and meet our players and they're, acting like jackasses, right? Like that's immediately a counter of what I say we believe in and what we teach and who we are. And so I think I honestly, I wish more parents, recruits, people would pay attention to that in the recruiting process, right? Because they get so caught up in the glitz and the glamour, but not the substance, right? Like, honestly, if somebody puts that up on the wall, test them on that. Like, ask them, how do you build that? Like, what do you do in a program to, build that up? So I think our intentionality of that being front and center. I'll talk about one of our pillars, man, after practice. Like it's an almost, I'd be a liar to say every day, but it is an almost daily reminder, teaching, education on what our four pillars are, right? And what how that relates, right, to the program. And honestly, this might sound weird, man, but I think it's harder to do that now because I don't the players we're coaching year in and year out now, it's so much more immediate gratification. They want probably more football than they even want character development, right? Because character development, I'm not making you a better player tomorrow. I'm making you a better husband and father, right? Like and they don't necessarily, I don't think they're drawn to that out of the gate. But I do think our older guys, when they've gone through the program and understand the importance that our goal is to help you be a better human, they get the bigger picture, by the time they're out.
Yeah, yeah. And then I know you talked about it earlier, and you did this with us at St. Joe. You did it during the off season. You did your character camps and stuff like that, and you're
Mhm.
still obviously doing those there at Seton Hill. How have you kind of built on those, or what? Really, kind of talk through what are those, why you do those, and kind of how you got into that process. Because I thought it was great when we did it back there, because it wasn't X's and O's, right? It was
No
something
doubt.
that was complete, had nothing to do with football. I mean, it was something
Yep.
that a student could walk in that wasn't even an athlete, and they could sit down and they could gain some knowledge from it. So kind of talk a little bit about those, or that piece of your program there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that for us, that's our opportunity to build young men, right? And kind of when I'm talking to recruits, what I equate this to, right, is I always ask them, well, if you want to get stronger, where do you go? Right. And immediately the answer, weight room, right?
Yeah,
If you want to ace a test, what do you do? Immediately answer, study, right? I don't know why we look at character differently, right? Like it's something you can develop. It's something we can work on to be better or worse, depending on what we surround ourselves with and what we intake, right, is what we're eventually going to output. So, what we do with our character camp sessions, man, is it's a really, really wide span. And again, man, honestly, I tailor this a little bit to what I think our team kind of needs, right? And what the messages need to be, because it's not, we still are limited on how many sessions we get to have. But sometimes it's drug and alcohol awareness, right? Like, we've done specifically when we've been, here in the last couple of years, we've done a marijuana education that much more than, I don't want to say we neglect alcohol, but I think marijuana right now is a hard one in college athletics because it's a lot of these guys go home and it's completely legal at home, right? Like, and it's something you can do and it's not frowned upon. And then you come back and you can't. And man, kids today, like you can't just say don't do that because I said so.
right.
They have to know the why, right? So being able to educate from that standpoint on more of, I don't even want to say drug and alcohol education. It was awareness, right? Like how that affects you as an athlete. How it's can be perceived as harmless, but there are negative side effects. So just education like that. We've done, social media awareness, understanding, right? Like, things you post today could lose you a job in, 10 to 15 years. The leadership segment has been a big part. over the last couple of years for sure. We bring in the Blackburn Center is a local nonprofit here in Greensburg. That's the biggest thing I would say we do here now, Nubis, better than I did at St. Joe, is incorporating other entities to come in to talk to our guys so that it's
Other
not
on-campus entities or just
and off. Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
In the
Local
community.
resources. Yeah. So the Blackburn Center is a local group here that focuses on domestic abuse and date violence, specifically date rape. So we bring them in to talk to our team every other year, right? Actually, next Wednesday is our session with our guys. And we do it every other year, right? So you're not catching them every year with kind of the same talk, but it's the session, man, it's not about like get the guys in the room and they listen to the speaker saying, hey, don't do this, right? Like everybody knows that, right? Everybody understands that. They actually do an unbelievable job. They come in and they train our guys on how to be what's called an upstander. So meaning if you're in that situation, how can you safely step in and stop it from happening? Right. So they come in and train our guys on those situations, especially on a college campus, right? Where it's a little more, prevalent given the situation of your environment of, parties on the weekends, right? Of like how to, again, not just don't do that, but man, help be leaders. Let's be leaders in those situations and not allow those things to occur. Man, so just various, financial literacy, that's another one that our guys have really enjoyed, because it's something they feel like they're getting some real life, some true value out of. So all those
Especially
ways
nowadays, and I don't know how much you guys deal with it, but with NIL and things like that and now they're getting it younger, right? Like I know the NFL does some programs with some of those things when rookies come in on how to manage money because they're getting an influx of a bunch of
of
money
how
that they've
much,
probably never had before. Um, now it's happening at a younger age with college students. I mean, you got 18-year-olds coming into college making millions. Um,
yeah, yeah.
Probably not at your place, but
Well, no, I heard our coaching network podcast is about to throw a couple grand into our
yeah,
NIL.
well, like I'm pretty close with the founders, so we can see what
If
we
that
can
does
do
it.
and get a little deal going on with Seton Hill there. That wouldn't be a bad
Yep.
little gig for you guys. But yeah, no, teaching them that financial literacy and understanding how to budget, how to understand, how to take
Yeah.
care of your money and things like that, I think is huge. So
And the other, again, I know there's going to be a lot of coaches on, right? And hopefully watching this at some point. And the other thing that I would tell you is love AFCA and what that weekend is. And it's such an important networking event, right? But I think, now I don't want to say look down on it, but I don't know that I don't know that there's quite as much programming at times as maybe there used to be.
yeah,
And as a coach, I mean, no matter what it is, if they have one session or if they have, 15 you can go to. A couple years ago, I don't remember where we were, but it was in Matt Rule spoke. And he talked about culture development. And those have always been for me ones I really have enjoyed going to, but talked about when he goes in and has to recreate a culture, how you do that, and separates his team into 3 different groups: learn it, live it, and defend it. And I heard that talk, and it was something, man, I was taking notes that whole time and developed this curriculum of what we do in our program 2 years ago. And it's a big part of what we still do, and who we are and how we go through that process of culture building. And so my point to that is, that one talk has changed our program for years, right? Just hearing him talk about that process and us being able to, kind of adapt it to our program and how we approach things, man, that's been really, really powerful.
yeah. So is that like, do you group your players into those
Yep.
categories? Like, hey, you're still in the learn it phase, you're in the live
Yep.
it phase, and then obviously your top guys or your defenders, they're the ones that are
Exactly.
advocating and making sure holding the other guys accountable, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yep. And then within our curriculum of the learn it, live it, defend it, when we break into character camp, so some are outside speakers, right? But if we're doing our learn it, live it, defend it training, all 3 go to their own rooms. So like what's being taught in the learn it room is different than the live it room, is different than the defendant room, right? It's trying to reach them where they are within that culture development. And so it's almost a separate curriculum of what each room gets. And like defend it for us, that's our leadership training. More than anything else, that room gets our leadership training, right? Because those are the guys that have to have the fortitude to step up and defend the culture, right? Like, and it's something for us, man. We have great conversations as a staff about it too. On sometimes we'll put a guy and defend it who doesn't actually defend it yet, right?
So
But
that they
we
can
put him
learn.
in exactly, right? You put him in defend it so that he's hearing that message. He's hearing the ability and understanding. Right now, that's a fluid list for us. It's something we actually evaluate at least going into and out of every semester, but can be fluid where guys, can bump up or down based on how they're acting within the culture, and so that's something we kind of fluidly do as a staff, and it's even caused in the exit meetings, man. Sometimes guys will ask like, coach, why am I not in defendant? And like that's such a great segue into, okay, well, this is what you have to do better, right? And it gives them a way to see it, see how to grow with the intangibles.
And it's probably a source of pride with some of the guys. Like, hey, I'm in the defendant group. They take that badge of honor, and then there's other guys that, like you said, like, why am I not in that group? So it's like, hey, I got to strive for something. It gives them
Yep.
a little bit more of that carrot at the end of the stick. How do
Yep.
you guys, as you guys evaluate it, what kind of criteria do you use to kind of, this guy's in the learn it stage, this guy's in the defended stage? What do you use to separate guys out? Is it kind of just how you feel on it? Do you have set criteria? What's kind of your guys' strategy to handle that?
We have I'd say a description of what each level truly means, right?
Okay.
So learn it is guys that we feel like cannot recite CPCW, which are our program pillars, right? Guys that can't recite CPCW, and with that, right, cannot cannot articulate the why. It's one thing to just be able to recite it, but
Yeah.
to get to live it, you have to know why the pillars are important, right? So that's kind of the first level of that. And live it, it's guys that, live the culture. And this is another, I think, important part of it in the conversation. It's not 100%, right? Who lives it 100%, right? Like we look at that and kind of put a metric on guys that live the culture 80% of the time, right? Guys that truly their characters there, right? The pride in the program, how we care about our teammates, right? And being able to win on and off the field.
Doesn't mean they won't make a mistake or somewhere they may not, they
Exactly.
may falter, but they're still striving towards better.
Exactly. Yep. 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 Exactly. And it's funny too because we had just had this conversation. We had the highest number of mid-year guys we've had since I've been here. But when you bring in guys, there's a lot of the mid-year guys that we brought in that are really already live it guys, but we can't put them in there yet because they have to know CPCW. So there's an element of that of like some guys are live it guys just because, man, that's how they were raised. That's how they approach life. That's what they do. But once you're live it right now, that next step is having the courage and the leadership ability to defend the culture, right? We don't have a lot of team rules. It's not that much different, man, than when you and I were together. Like, no hats in the cafeteria. Well, if you see a guy in the cafeteria and you're in live it, right, and or you're in defend it, and you walk in that cafeteria and don't tell that guy to take his hat off,
Yeah.
you're gonna get bumped out of defend it. Like that's exactly what we're talking about. Upholding the standard of the program. That's what defend it guys have to do.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then do you find it so you said you started this 2 years ago or
Yeah.
okay, so do you find it difficult or how do you avoid the trap of, okay, I started this last year and guys started buying in, and not kind of resting on your laurels, which I think can be a mistake that a lot of coaches can make. Like, oh, I've told them what it's supposed to be, and then they know what the expectation is, but they fall into that trap and not realizing like you're getting new guys in every single year. You're getting new coaches in, a lot of the time. So, what do you do to make sure that you're not falling into that trap of,
Yeah, right. Like,
'cause,
yeah,
you know,
right. Like,
you
It's a podcast. I think what's cool, right, is just having a conversation. I think you watch some of these podcasts, and you're like, I'm the greatest human being on earth, right? I'm gonna tell you right now, we made the exact mistake that you just said last offseason. We were going through, some coaching changes and had to get some new guys in place. And so our focus had kind of shifted to football and not as much culture development in the spring. And we kind of scrambled coming out of spring of like, we really then identified our leadership is awful. And that's where we went and kind of became hypersensitive to that in the summer. So absolutely made that mistake. I think it's one of the aspects of coaching in general of, we do a bad job. It's easy to do a bad job, I should say. Not that we do, but it's easy as a coach to do a bad job of, okay, we did that. Check that box. We don't need to do this anymore, right? Like when we're coaching, right? I think one of the most common interview questions are, Coach, what are your EDDs? All right. Okay. I can go through this. This is what I coach. This is what I believe in.
Right.
Well, we need as coaches, like culturally, right, to have EDDs. Like we've got to have some things that we don't allow that to become an afterthought. Honestly, Coach, like this is an awesome conversation because we just had this exact talk as a staff that our attention to detail right now as a program in terms of the way that our players are approaching certain things, it's awful, right? So whose fault is that? It's not just theirs.
Right.
We've moved on to bigger things. We're taking the next step as a program, but we have to pause that and look back and say like, no. Our attention to detail is bad. We cannot allow that to be something we gloss over and move on to the next step. We rewind, make sure this is right, and move on. And that's something I have to do better of. I shouldn't have to rewind, right? So the fact that we had to rewind, that's not even the coach's staff fault. That's my fault that we had to rewind because I've got to remind them. I need to remind them to remind the players, don't forget the little details.
Right. And it's probably more so important now because, like you said, you just had some really good success. You've been able to capitalize on that from the recruiting standpoint, but you don't also want that to become something that start to cut guys, get complacent, guys feel like
Foundation. Yep.
yeah, hey, we've kind of gotten where we are and we're good. So well, before we got a few more minutes left, I'll kind of transition one last question or one last topic. I guess for you, you've been there 5 years. How has your approach to culture building changed from a new coach that just taken over a program to a coach that's trying to maintain and continue to build on what you've already established, if that question makes sense? How have you developed and changed over those 5 years? What's different in how you approach things when you first get there versus how you have to approach things day to day in the situation you're in now?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. Because I think so many of us as coaches really do truly believe in culture. Like, I don't think that's an overly used buzz term. I mean, I really do think it's real. A lot of coaches want to build culture. But you're kind of brought up, if that's what you believe in, and those are the books you read, and those are the speakers you watch, right? You're kind of brought up to think, if my culture's right, we're going to be okay, right? And I'm going to be honest with you, man, like the best lesson I learned in my, time at Seton Hill, that's not necessarily the case. You still have to perform on the football field, right? And I think that is one of the biggest aspects that really, I would say, helped me. Our culture has grown every single year. I don't think at all our culture has been here. I think it's been consistently getting better year after year. And our second year here, we won 5 games. And that was, man, the first time we'd won 5 games in like 7 years. I mean, it was like, a pretty big for year 2 for us to already have hit that. So we go into the next year, we focused a lot on culture development and felt like, man, next year's the year, right? Like that's when we're going to be really good. And we opened the season 0-7, right? A year that we felt like everything is in place finally. Yeah. And we open up 0-7. And, and I would argue with anybody that ever has been able to, build culture at different places or had an opportunity to see our program culture. I would argue to anybody, right? Because you could come in and say, well, that's the year you worked the hardest on culture, and you guys went 2-8. It's not that important.
Hmm.
Hell no. Because I'll tell you what, buddy, had we not done the culture work we did, this program would have been on fire, right? And like it would have collapsed had we not done the culture piece. Because if you'd have come out to our practices, even though we weren't getting it done to the level we needed to win the games, our practice energy, atmosphere, effort was awesome. It was not that, right? So, like, I think that's the best thing I took out of it is you can't, culture's a separate entity, right? Like and we just talked to our team about this. If you take talent and you put two teams against each other in a computer simulation, and the only thing that matters is talent, the more talented team will win 10 times out of 10, right? Culture is really your ability to start. I know you're a video. I don't know if you still play Call of Duty, Fortnite.
I
You
know not anymore. Although with NCAA coming out, I might have to get back on the
get back
sticks.
into video games, right?
Yeah,
I look at your culture development as kind of like your do we're building our loadout, right? Like we're
yeah,
being able to add the attributes that give us just a little bit better chance and opportunity to be successful. Doesn't guarantee it's going to be there. But when that talent is even, right, and our intangibles are higher, that's when we're going to win those games, right? When your talent might be lower, but your intangible levels are higher, still doesn't mean you're going to win, but it gives you the best chance to be successful in those moments. So I think for coaches that are building culture, man, trust what you're doing. There's moments it's easy to doubt it. Like, trust what you're doing from a culture development. Be able to step back and look at yourself and say, what do I need to do better here? How do I need to get this message across more, right? But the best thing from a coaching standpoint that we did this year, right, when we started as poorly as we did, I would say that wasn't necessarily football related. It wasn't. I wouldn't compare it to the year previous where we struggled, but that's just, I know, longer, deeper, separate conversation. But I think when you look at when you look at that and your message as a coach can be consistent, that helped from a leadership standpoint. I would say that was the other big piece that pulled us out. It never felt like this we're terrible. That no, God, like we are honestly this close. And then when we hit it and they saw it and they felt it, that's when we were able to rattle off 5 out of 6, right? Won 4 straight down the end of the year, and like the momentum we're carrying because they've crossed that bridge. They see it that, yeah, we absolutely can do this.
yeah. Awesome. Well, awesome, coach. It was some really good stuff there. I mean, I'm a big culture guy. I always feel like that's the make or break deal. I mean, at some point, no matter how good you are, you're going to play somebody that's just as good. And
Starts and stretch lines.
starts and stretch line. Yeah, no doubt. You can always, I've always felt you can tell how good a team, how cultured a team is by the way they do their stretch lines. And I may not be the win or loss definition right there, but when that talent is equal and a lot of the other pieces are equal and it's all level playing field, which may only happen a few times a year, but those are the big games. That's where the culture is going to be the make or break factor, in my opinion. So some
Yep.
great stuff. I think you're obviously building that program in a great way, and I think what you became the winningest program or winningest coach in program history this year. So it's obviously showing that it's paying off and that you're on the right track. So thanks again, Coach. Really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with me and talking some culture because it's a subject I love. It's near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate you jumping on and having that discussion with me today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for the invite. And I don't know how many of these you're going to do, but I hope at some point we have like a 2.0.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hopefully we'll be able to build on this and be able to keep bringing you some good things on the network here on Forward Progress. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you guys next time.